from the Pinellas County Schools Administration Building in Largo. This is PCS Journal with Al Ruechel.
Hi everybody, I'm Al Ruechel and welcome to the PCS Journal, where we sit down and chat with people within Pinellas County Schools about what it is they do and how it affects your children and all of us. Glad you could join us today. My guest today is Dr. Antonio Burt, the Director of School Transformation. Dr. Burt, good to see you again.
Likewise, good to see you.
We've had a chance to interview several times on Bay News 9, and it's always good to see you. And I'm glad to know that you haven't pulled your beard out or anything in frustration as you're going through with this tremendous project. Let me start it right out from the beginning, because I want our audience that's watching this right now to understand a little bit more about you before we start getting into this program, because to understand what we're doing with the program is to understand what you went through in your background. Tell me about your education first.
So I come to Florida from Memphis, Tennessee, where I had recently served in the capacity of Chief of Special Academic Projects for the Achievement School District, which is a state-run authorized district which takes over the lowest performing schools in the state. Prior to joining the Achievement School District, I was a turnaround principal as a part of the Innovation Zone in Memphis, able to take a school from the bottom 5% to the top 25% in only 2 years, named back-to-back reward school by the state of Tennessee. And prior to that, I served as accountability partner, supporting principals that was new to education, a native of Alabama, doctorate in school turnaround. So I actually did my research. My dissertation was centered on school turnaround and the competence that's needed from a school leader perspective.
See, I didn't realize there's a doctorate in school turnaround. That tells me two things. Number one, that there's a program out there, and number two, it must be a problem because programs aren't created just for nothing, and there are reasons they come. So when you say it's a turnaround degree, I mean, what kind of things do they teach you? What kind of things do they study?
So it wasn't a degree, it's actually I did my dissertation focus on school turnaround. So extensive research on what are the best practices and actions that yield the highest academic achievement gains. And so my studies took me into like a lot of different areas, studied across the country with the work, but I was also a practitioner who was doing the work at the same time.
Oh my gosh.
So I was able to look at it through two different lenses.
Yeah, you could test these theories that were being done. So in your studies, what are some of the commonalities of the reasons that schools don't do as well?
So really a lot of the trend data will show, or research will support, that it's not really systemic organizational support. So with school turnaround, all the organizations have to be aligned. A lot of instances it's done in silo or isolation, and so you don't see the different departments working in conjunction to support the turnaround work, because the individuals that's in school turnaround, they must have what's often phrased as the big yes from the district and from the community to really do the work that's really non-traditional when it comes to turning around schools.
You know, though, that people in Pinellas County, some, think it is systemic. And that's hurdle number one to get over. How do you convince them it's not systemic?
So you really have to go in and identify areas to get immediate short wins. And with the short wins, you identify how you can really catapult those short wins to larger academic gains. So it's going in and identifying what those fault lines are that may be barriers to the current work, and then in addressing the fault lines in very strategic, intentional ways to celebrate the short wins but build capacity at the same time.
Okay, what are some of these barriers that you see? Generally, and then I'm going to talk specifically about our schools.
So barriers from a school level would often be the culture and climate of the school. So it may be one where they suffered low academic progress over an extended period of time. So you start having a defeated mindset. So it's going in, how do we instill pride back into the school, back into the community, to change the conversation from oftentimes behavior to academic excellence. That's normally barrier number one. Barrier number two often looks at the teaching and learning that's taking place in the school. How do we raise that level of rigor to where all kids are being challenged each and every day? And once you raise the level of rigor, you're switching the mindset and focusing off of behavior more so on academics, and you're starting to get buy-in from the stakeholders inside of the school.
So as you've been presenting your material, and I've actually talked to some people that have seen some of your work already, and for a couple of people I talked to, they said, you know, the lights kind of went on, i.e., we kind of knew what some of the problems were, but nobody had been able to exactly identify them. And even more importantly than identifying them is then coming up with solutions. So which is more difficult, identifying them or coming up with a solution to correct it?
The identifying part is probably, to me, the easier part. with my training and background, I'm able to go in and do a SWOT analysis of buildings, identify what the strengths are, weaknesses, what are those
SWOT analysis.
what are those opportunities and what are those potential threats that may be barriers to the current work, and with that, put a plan of action into place around those barriers. So the solution piece often is where you may get the pushback because it's a process that normally changes the status quo.
Right.
And when you change status quo, sometimes that work can be uncomfortable.
Has there been some pushback from within the system? And I know without the system there has been, but within the system?
I wouldn't say it's pushback within the system. It may be some unfamiliarity to where individuals may not really know what the next step may be. And so really, how do you go about supporting but also enlightening throughout the process?
You know, I heard an old elementary teacher say many, many years ago, and I don't know whether you've ever said anything like this, but I've watched some of the video on the discipline track here, that I heard one of my teachers to say, discipline begins in a straight line. And I used to kind of go, what? But if you watch elementary school's behavior, the kids, you know, some of the kids, they don't want to stand in a straight line no matter what. Now, one would think, well, why does discipline begin there? Well, if you are lax in that area, then who knows? Is that a true statement?
Yes. One of the major components, or one of the 5 pillars of school turnaround, is strong, efficient system and operations. So system and operations also deal with schools having tight transitions to and from class, to and from the cafeteria, schools having tight arrival procedures, dismissal procedures, because kids in an environment that's in a turnaround setting, they respond to one structure, but most importantly, consistently. So if you do it on day 1, you have to do it on day 180 also. When you start venturing from what those non-negotiables are inside the building, kids view it as if really no one cares. So then you start seeing kids, quote unquote, taking over the building.
Yeah.
So that's why that structure, that consistency, whether it's the straight lines, whether it's how we enter to and from class, whether it's how we follow the person in front of us or behind us, you have to be consistent, because the consistency lets them know that everyone in the building cares and it's of high value to them and to you as well.
Again, part of this discussion, and the interesting thing about it is that since your arrival, I think there's been a lot more open discussion about what really is going on. And I'm going to ask you this, and I don't mean it in any kind of a racist way at all. Do African American kids or kids that come from poverty learn different? Do they have a different language than kids from other parts?
I wouldn't say the language is differently. I would say the cultural experience is different.
Okay.
So the individuals that's supporting schools that's predominantly African American really will have to be able to connect with that culture experience. You know, a lot of times you hear cultural competencies, but cultural competency is my ability to be able to connect with your personal experience in the current learning environment in which you're in. So if you're in a learning environment around you where you may be faced with drugs, gang violence, whatever the case may be, the individuals that's with you at the school level must be able to connect and relate to that. So before you can do any type of teaching, that student has to know, like, this person really understands or they get what I may be dealing with. The learning is the learning for any kid, but the connection piece is often the missing piece, because if I can't connect with you, then often I can't teach you.
Washington University, a number of years ago, when I used to work in the St. Louis market, did an extensive study to try to figure out what kind of expectation levels that the parents or the grandparents had, what kind of impact it would have on the children. And what they found, which was no surprise, is that if the parents had low expectations for their children or their grandchildren, that inevitably the children suffered because they didn't think they could succeed, because their parents were having such a difficult time, or their grandparents didn't think they could succeed.
Yes, that's a major, that's why the major component is culture and climate, because culture and climate taps into the mindset. You may be in an environment where you have to break the mindset of generational poverty, so it's a lot about exposure. Exposure is not just going to different locations, but it's also exposing the individual to a different way of life, a different way of work, a different focus. So that focus may shift from what may be traditional to now let's focus on college and what does college look like? What does that mean for you as an individual? How is that going to be different from everyone that may be around you? So when you talk about improving culture and climate, it's not just in a building, but it's the expectation or beliefs that one holds dear to themselves.
One of the things that you did right away, because you've been given a lot of latitude at what you're doing from Dr. Grego, and I know Dr. Grego has said that one of the reasons he came to Pinellas County Schools is because he wanted to be part of a turnaround in some of these low-performing schools. You had all the principals re-interview from the jobs, and you shifted some of those around. Now, how do you handle that so the principal that was there doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, I've failed and I've been demoted? Also, the new people coming in feeling like this is such an overwhelming task, I don't know how I'm going to accomplish it.
You know, in school turnaround, individuals that's in a turnaround setting, they must possess the turnaround competence that's needed. You know, you have driving for results, being able to influence for results, being able to problem solve, and being able to show confidence to lead, because this is not like any traditional school. Individuals will be faced with a lot of challenges. So when we was looking at the current schools, we had principals that was doing great jobs that was in the school, but it's also a time when you have to look at how do you take the school to the next level.
Yeah.
And that next level is often tied to high academic performance. So when we were going through the process, we wanted to place the individual that was the best fit at the school that could take the school to the next level and raise those grade levels from the current status to the status that we're hoping to achieve.
Let's talk about time frame too, because you were able to do the turnaround in 2 years. Now, the world of education, on one hand, seems to spin very rapidly, but the problem is that your test run, if you want to call it that, the first year, I mean, do you know what's going on between when the program starts and when it ends? Or do you get to the end and go, oh my goodness, this stuff that we've been working on for 9 months now hasn't worked?
Yeah, so the data analysis piece is probably the most important piece, because you know, when you're looking at how do you use data to drive instruction, you have to have a pulse on that daily. So we're putting systems in place. We're adding bi-weekly common assessments so we can know every 2 weeks how our kids are performing and where they're standing. We're also adding what's called MAP, which is a National Norm Reference Benchmark Assessment. So we'll do benchmark interim assessment every 8 weeks. So that'll give us real-time data for us where our kids are scoring in relation to the standard and its norm reference. So we can compare our kids in the transformation zone with kids in a similar grade across the U.S.
And that's great, because that has been one criticism of the school district in the past, is that you didn't understand what was going on enough, and then all of a sudden some of these schools were found not to be doing as well. If you notice, there's a word I'm not going to be using through this interview, so they're not just doing as well. Now, you've had some time. Obviously, next year is when more of this is going to be implemented, next school year, but have we seen improvements now in the last, let's say the last 2 years?
Yes, so we've seen gradual improvement with this year. With the results that recently came out, we saw SAT 10 improvement in first and second grade. A lot of the schools in the transformation zone had double-digit gains on the SAT 10, which is also a norm reference assessment that the state requires. We also saw improvement in the recent results in third grade with our FSA data. So it's gradual improvement. We're looking next year to take that improvement and go to another level to make the dramatic academic gains where we see it across the board in all of our schools.
We have 2 pending lawsuits that are still out there that relate back to Bradley, and a couple of these other lawsuits that go back to desegregation years ago. I covered all that stuff for way back to 1986, so I'm very familiar with this kind of stuff. So in terms of people that are watching us right now, what can you say to them that will give them confidence that we are on the right track?
I would say initially that first trust the process. With any process, you go through 4 stages: the forming, the storming, the norming, and performing. We're getting ready to hit the norming stage with the opening of the 16-17 school year, and by the end of that school year, we'll be performing at a high level. But it is a process, and with any process, you got to go through the early stages. The early stages was our diagnostic. We've identified those fault lines,
Yep.
and we're putting systems in place to address the fault lines. And during the 16-17 school year, you'll see dramatic improvement in all of those fault line areas that was identified.
And in case anybody says that you guys aren't taking this seriously enough, what would your response be to that?
Coming to the school, because our actual proof is in the action that'll be taking place daily.
All right, Dr. Burt, always good to see you. Thank you for talking with us. Good luck. What
you.
a challenge you face, and I can't wait till we get on the other side of this and we can celebrate all of your achievements and the achievements of the students too. I mean, that's the key right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Back with more of our program in just a minute, so please stay with us.